Hi, my name is Dr. Lucas, and I'm currently 33 years old. And what I want to talk to you about today in this video is I have been reflecting on my life and how much has changed and how much I'm still working for it to change. But what is the importance of neuroplasticity, metacognition, and journaling? I know I seem to talk about this a lot, but I sat down today for like 2 or 3 hours journaling and reflecting here on the iPad on this couch. The power of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is, the study of your brain, the belief that your brain can change. And there's like science evidence behind this. And I know that there are certain ways and certain systems that our world is set up. But I am a big believer of believing, really. Sometimes people will say it's faith, right? Or believing. But whatever it is, there is science behind believing that if life could get better, that it does, and there is a chance for it to get better, right? So what is the importance of neuroplasticity? Metacognition means you are learning or you're observing the way that you think. This is something that I learned in grad school back when I was in Vermont, and I think that that's been also like a game changer in how I navigate life and how I figure out the gaps within my own learning. I sound like I sound like a grad student, and I try my best to like speak as simply as possible, but this is the professor nerdy version of me coming out. And like, what's the importance of journaling, y'all? So I come from a really, really traumatic childhood. I grew up in the Philippines. I have really happy childhood memories, but also very traumatic ones. I was SA'd as a child twice by two different people who were super close to me. But I always had this belief that that wasn't the end of it. I knew that if I worked hard for my future kids and future family, that we would have a better life. And now that I'm 33, I feel like I'm finally arriving. But ever since I was like 9 years old to now, I have been like surviving and working really hard to just like have a better life overall. And now I'm finally getting to sit down. Now that I'm done with my doctorate degree, I finally get to sit down and say, whew, like we made it, and like let's process that. And the words that come up for me are neuroplasticity, metacognition, and journaling. So let me get into my notes here for you guys. Why does writing change your brain? So there's a reason that the most effective thinkers, healers, and creators throughout history have kept journals. It's not nostalgia or sentimentality. It's actually something called neuroscience. Journaling is one of the most accessible and underutilized tools for rewiring the brain and developing the kind of self-awareness that transforms how we live and lead. So what is neuroplasticity and why does it matter? Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. For a very long time, science believed that the brain was fixed after childhood. And an example of this is believing, some people in the old times believed that only children can learn a new language. But now, with more science, we know that adults can learn new languages too with enough time, processing, and, just exposure to that environment. So we now know that that's wrong. The brain remains malleable, and the habits, practices, and experiences we engage in consistently shape its structure and function. Writing is one of those practices, and so when you journal regularly, you're not just recording thoughts, you're actively building new pathways in the brain. And the act of translating experience into language engages our prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Over time, this really strengthens those circuits in our brain. It makes it easier to pause before reacting, to see patterns in your own behavior, and choose intentional responses over automatic ones. And so the metacognitive power of putting pen to paper. And metacognition is thinking about your thinking. It's the ability to step outside your own mental processes and observe them with some degree of objectivity. The skill is foundational to learning, growth, and emotional intelligence, and journaling is one of the most direct pathways to developing it. When you write about an experience, you're forced to slow down and externalize what's happening internally. You move from being inside the thought to looking at it, right? Metacognition goes from life happening to you actually extracting all the lessons and like kind of reliving that again. So you move from being inside the thought to looking at it, and that shift is really profound. Research from psychologist James Pennebaker shows that expressive writing about thoughts and feelings around difficult experiences, reduces psychological distress, and the active narrative making of constructing a coherent story from raw emotion experiences itself a healing and organizing process for the brain. And just like some extra thoughts from that, metacognition is also, the best way I could frame it is mindless scrolling and not even knowing what you're consuming anymore, but like being an active person in your own learning, right? So it's intentional. Sorry, I'm like pointing here. This is like the stuff I'm very passionate about. It's being intentional about what you're learning. For example, I can reflect on what do I learn from Instagram? How do I learn there? Versus me being on YouTube, consuming long form content. How do I feel? How does my gut feel taking in this kind of information versus short form content that's being pushed out on Instagram or Facebook? And that's just one of the most recent ones that I've had in regards to metacognition. But I'm also a teacher, so I've had to learn what are things I actually don't know. How do I go and find that information? How do I go and fill in that gap? But also giving myself enough credit. What do I actually already know, and what are my strengths and gifts in regards to this profession or what I bring to the workplace, etc., etc. But metacognition for me is like knowing that I'm not the best editor right now for content creation. But what I can do is show up and take action, right? And find clarity through the mess. And that's how I'm going to fill that gap, because I know soon that the game will start with editing. But for now, I am just showing up to the camera because that's a gap that I have, right? Is showing up to the camera every single day and practicing that. So that's metacognition, is like knowing where the gap is and like filling them in slowly. Not that I could do it in like 2 days. This is day 29 of posting here on YouTube. But I know my gaps, which is one of them is consistency. And a lot of clarity comes with consistency as well. And then the last part, second to last, is journaling daily. Right here. Journaling daily is actually a neurological workout. So consistency matters more than perfection. And for me, I try to write 500 words for my memoir and then write 3 pages on the journal. It creates repetition to our brain, and it actually builds new neural pathways. So that's the current phase I'm in my life, is journaling is now consistent in my brain. That neurological pathway has been built. Talking to you guys on the camera, that consistent pathway has been built. Some of the new ones that I want to form is building that muscle for pitching to companies and connecting with them. And that's been a problem for me for the past 2 years. And that is intentionally, that's in my brain, that's a neurological pathway that I need to build, right? That's a muscle that I want to build. And think of it like physical training. One run doesn't build cardiovascular fitness, right? Or swimming or even surfing. One surf lesson, it doesn't really get you anywhere. It makes you feel alive, but in regards to skills and how good you are and how if you could stand up on the board, one surfing lesson doesn't answer it or it doesn't solve the whole problem. But running consistently, surfing consistently over months changes your body at a structural level. Journaling works the same way. And over time, regular journalers report greater emotional regulation, improved problem solving, reduced anxiety, and a stronger sense of self. The thing that I think too is that we could write things into existence. There's so many things that I've written in my journal or my sticky notes that are around my house that I know happened because I wrote it into existence. Like that's the woo-woo magical part of it, you guys. I'm such a strong advocate for journaling because it's accessible. Like anybody could buy a notebook or a journal and a pen, and the power is literally in your hands and brain. And I'm not going to go and say like I will write it, right, that I'll be healed and stuff, but there is no loss in believing in a greater future, right? I've tried to go the route of not believing too much because my heart would break. I was like, what's the point of believing so much and working so hard if I am just going to wither away from cancer? But I really believe that belief itself is a kind of medicine that our soul needs. Like we have to hang on to hope and belief in order to make it through the next day, in order to have hope. Because if something were to happen to me in the future, then I can say that I lived on earth having utter belief, like delusional belief, and at least I tried to believe, rather than going to my room, staying in the dark, and like just being cynical and seeing the world for what it really is. Because I don't think we were put on this world to just live the life we were handed. What if I, just kind of focused on being SA'd as a kid? And I did for 10 years, I had to heal through that and really process it. But what if I just stayed there? What if I stayed in my trauma? Then I would just be drinking my own poison. Those that harmed me would have won, right? They were telling me that I was not worthy of safety, that I was not worthy of a good future, that I was like disposable because of their greed or whatever, how they were feeling. But I think that the best revenge, right, to people who talk shit, who try to bring us down, who harm us physically and take away our sense of safety, is rebuilding our own lives and being able to be a bad bitch, to be a queen of your own life. And that is like the best revenge, because whatever those people, whoever have harmed you or continue to harm you or speak death and illness over your life, that energy, you could rebuke it and send it right back to them. I feel like I'm now 33 and I could tell my younger self these things, right? So that is, what else? Let me see my notes. Yeah, so the last part that I wrote was that for those of us carrying like really heavy cognitive and emotional loads, whether you're a teacher, clinician, a medical doctor, leader, or caregiver, journaling isn't a luxury. It's something like a hygienic maintenance, but it's for our spirit and our bodies. And the daily download of our thoughts onto the page creates that offloading, right? It frees up mental bandwidth for higher order thinking. It also creates a record of growth and a trail of evidence that you are changing and healing and becoming, even when it doesn't feel that way sometimes. And that's how I woke up today. I actually woke up feeling pretty heavy from like the previous day's work stuff. I'm also a special educator, and so that carries a lot of emotional distress. There's a lot of things from the system that I know that we as teachers and empaths can absorb, but I did a brain dump for a good 45 minutes, And I was able to feel that the more I was writing, the better I was feeling, because I started to realize I could only do my best and very best within the system that has been set up, right? But I'm doing my best. I'm having students journal and read, and they could feel the change within their minds too. And I think as like a nerdy person and teacher, that's the best gift ever, is like literally seeing them transform and their thoughts transform every single morning that I'm working with them. And I wanted to spread that gift to you because, yeah, we got to talk about neuroplasticity, metacognition, and journaling. And Olympian Alyssa Liu, no, it's not Alyssa Liu. It is somebody else. Let me go and find her. My best friend sent it to me, and I said it in a previous video. Ooh, I disconnected the Wi-Fi. But she talks about how it's actually a very pleasant experience to be in her own mind, and it's a nice place to be. But I'm going to play it again because I love it so much.
You think before you speak, because you answer questions so quickly and so comprehensively, whether it's about geopolitics or your sport or aerodynamics. Like, can you take us into your brain?
Thank you, Charlotte. That's very kind. Oh man. Do I think? I think overall I'm just a pensive person. Like I'm an introspective young woman. Like I spend a lot of time in my head, and it's not a bad place to be. I journal a lot. I break down all of my thought processes. I think I apply a very analytical lens to my own thinking, and I kind of modify it because it's so interesting. You can control what you think. Like you can control how you think, and therefore you can control who you are. And especially as a young person, like I'm 22, so with neuroplasticity on my side, I can literally become exactly who I want to be. How cool is that? Like how empowering is that, right? And so the fact is I get to become every day the kind of person that me at age 8 would revere. Like I would be obsessed with me today.
Yeah. So that is one example, but if you could look, a lot of people have mastered neuroplasticity and metacognition. And I don't want to come off super woo-woo, but there's like psychological and science evidence now. I read The Secret last month, and I'm not sure if they really talked about the psychological evidence in that, but I was like, okay, it's solely like belief. And I also grew up very Christian, you know, believing in God, believing that I'm God's daughter, etc., etc. So I could speak the language of Christianity, but there's also, it's so fascinating is like seeing this all come out and like science backed evidence, you know? So yeah, let's talk metacognition and neuroplasticity. Thank you so much for being here. I feel so excited to have finally been able to talk about this and like the nerdy terms. But thank you for being here and for watching this video.